They gave us tickets. They said we were going to see Johnny Carson. They told us we'd laugh, go home and sleep. That's what they said. Nobody told us what was actually going to happen on that stage. Nobody warned us. Nobody could have. I was 22 years old. I didn't sleep for 3 days. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My girlfriend thought I was sick. I wasn't sick. I was changed. 50 years later, and I'm still hesitant to tell people what I saw, because once you hear this story, you won't forget it either. Have you ever watched someone walk into a room and immediately felt that they were different? Not louder, not bigger, just different in a way you couldn't explain. That's exactly what happened on this night. And if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel small by someone who thought their size or status gave them power over you, this story is going to hit different. NBC Studios, Burbank, California, November 1971. Friday night, 11 minutes past 9. A production assistant named Gerald Mayers is standing in the narrow backstage corridor between dressing rooms 1 and 3, holding a clipboard and sweating through his shirt. He had worked on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson for 2 years. He had managed drunk comedians, feuding actors, a senator who got sick backstage before going on air. None of that prepared him for tonight. Tonight, he was responsible for making sure 2 men reached the studio stage on time. One of those men was Bruce Lee. The other was André the Giant. And 12 minutes ago, something happened in that hallway that changed the entire plan for the show. It started 3 weeks earlier in Johnny Carson's private office on the 2nd floor of the NBC Burbank building. Carson was meeting with his producer Fred Cordova, a seasoned Hollywood director who had joined the show the year before. They were planning a special episode. Ratings had slipped slightly during November sweeps, and the network wanted something bold, something people would still be discussing at the office on Monday morning. "I want Bruce Lee back," Carson said, leaning back in his leather chair, tossing a pencil between his fingers. "The audience loved him last time. The response we received after his appearance was extraordinary. People are still talking about it." Fred nodded. "Bruce is available. He's between projects, waiting on a deal with Warner Brothers. He'd probably welcome the exposure." "Good," Carson replied, "but I don't want a repeat of last time. I don't want him breaking boards and talking about water. I want something different, something with tension." Fred paused. "What kind of tension?" Carson smiled. The smile that Ed McMahon once described as the most dangerous expression in television, because it meant Johnny had an idea. And Johnny's ideas were either brilliant or catastrophic, with almost no middle ground. "What if we put him next to someone large, and I mean physically enormous? Someone so massive that the audience immediately assumes there's no way Bruce Lee could stand his ground. Someone who makes Bruce look like a kid. Then we let them interact. We don't script it. We don't plan it. We just put them in the same space and see what unfolds." Fred considered this. "Who did you have in mind?" "There's a wrestler, French. They call him André the Giant. He's roughly 7 feet tall, over 400 pounds. He's been wrestling in Montreal, selling out arenas. He's enormous, and from what I've heard, he has personality. He's charming when he wants to be, but he's also got an ego. He doesn't like being outshined, and he definitely doesn't respond well to being told someone else is more impressive than him." Fred leaned forward. "Johnny, if we put a 400-pound professional wrestler next to a 135-pound martial artist on live television, and something goes wrong, that's exactly why people will watch." Fred. That conversation set everything in motion. Invitations were extended. Bruce Lee accepted within a day. He was hungry for American television exposure. His film career in Hong Kong was taking off, but Hollywood still viewed him as a supporting player, a novelty. Every major network appearance was a chance to shift that perception. André's scheduling was more complicated. He was touring wrestling promotions across the Eastern Seaboard, performing 4 to 5 nights a week in different cities. But when his manager heard the words "Tonight Show" and 28 million viewers, the calendar was rearranged. André would fly directly from a show in Philadelphia on Thursday night to Los Angeles Friday morning. He would arrive at NBC Studios by 4 in the afternoon. Plenty of time. That was the plan. Clean, simple, professional. But plans tend to collapse when they collide with reality. And reality, on this particular Friday in November 1971, weighed 420 pounds and had been drinking since noon. André's flight from Philadelphia landed at LAX at 1:47 in the afternoon. He had slept maybe 2 hours on the plane, folded into two first-class seats the airline had awkwardly modified by removing the armrest. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The world was not built for André René Rousimov. Airplane seats were not built for him. Hotel beds were not built for him. Doorways were not built for him. He had spent his entire life forcing his body into spaces designed for smaller people. And depending on his mood, that fact made him either quietly philosophical or intensely volatile. Today, his mood was the second kind. His manager, Frank Valois, a former Canadian wrestler who had known André since 1966, met him at the airport with a rented Lincoln Continental, the only car with enough legroom. André folded himself into the passenger seat, his knees pressing against the dashboard, his head grazing the roof even with the seat pushed all the way back. He said nothing for the first 20 minutes. Then he spoke. "Who is this other guest?" His voice was deep, French accented, like something rising up from underground. Frank glanced sideways. "His name is Bruce Lee. He's a martial artist. He used to appear on the Green Hornet. He's very well known in Hong Kong right now." André made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a dismissal, something that came from a man who had spent his life being the biggest, the strongest, the most physically dominant person in every single room he had ever entered. "A kung fu actor," André repeated, "and they want to place him beside me on television. For what reason? Entertainment, André, that's what the program is. They want the contrast, the size difference. Carson believes it will make good television. Carson believes placing a small man next to me is entertainment." André's jaw tightened. "I'm not a circus animal, Frank. I'm not a background prop for some actor to pose beside so audiences can marvel at how large I am." Frank said nothing. He had learned over 5 years of managing André that when the giant was in this mood, silence was wiser than words. What Frank chose not to mention was something he had overheard from one of Carson's producers during a phone call 2 days earlier. The producer had said, almost casually, that Carson had been telling people Bruce Lee was the most impressive physical specimen he had ever had on the show. Frank understood exactly what those words would do to André. André, who had been called the eighth wonder of the world. André, who could lift 400 pounds overhead. André, who had once flipped a car during a bar dispute in Montreal because someone had called him a freak. If André learned that Johnny Carson considered a 135-pound martial arts instructor more physically impressive than him, the evening would not go well. And here's something worth sitting with for a moment. Have you ever felt like your greatest strength, the thing that defines you, was dismissed by someone who barely knew you? André carried that insecurity his entire life beneath all that size. He was constantly trying to prove that he wasn't just a spectacle, that his value wasn't just his dimensions. And the moment he heard someone else was being called more impressive, that wound reopened. André arrived at NBC Studios at 4:22 in the afternoon, 38 minutes late. The production team had prepared for his arrival. They had measured doorways, reinforced the chair in dressing room 3, and stocked his room according to his contract requirements, 2 cases of French wine and 1 case of Canadian beer. By the time the show's stage manager came to brief André on the format at 7 in the evening, 6 bottles of wine were empty and André had moved on to the beer. He wasn't drunk by his standards, but there was a looseness about him, a warmth in his eyes that could turn cold in a moment. The stage manager chose his words carefully. "Mr. Rousimov, you'll be the second guest tonight. Mr. Lee will come out first, do his segment with Johnny. And then you'll be introduced. Johnny will bring you out, you'll take your seat, and then he'll guide a conversation between the two of you. Light, relaxed, entertaining, nothing physical, just a conversation." André looked down at the stage manager from a height that made the man feel like a child standing before a monument. "Nothing physical," André repeated slowly, his accent shaping the words. Then he smiled, a smile that showed teeth but carried no warmth. "We will see." Bruce Lee arrived at NBC Studios at 5:15 in the afternoon, nearly 3 hours before showtime. He came alone. No entourage, no manager hovering nearby, no publicist whispering instructions. Just Bruce, carrying a small leather bag, wearing a navy blue suit his wife Linda had selected that morning at their home in Bel Air. He had kissed his 2-year-old daughter Shannon goodbye, told his 6-year-old son Brandon to behave for his mother, and driven himself to Burbank in his black Mercedes. Quietly, calmly, the way he did everything. The production assistant who met him at the entrance was a young woman named Carol. She recognized him instantly and her eyes went wide. Not because he was famous, though he was, but because in person Bruce Lee radiated something that cameras only partially captured. There was a stillness to him, a coiled readiness, like a spring compressed to its absolute limit, but held perfectly in place. She noticed that his footsteps made no sound, none, on a concrete floor. She would tell this story for years afterward. The man walked like he was weightless. Bruce was shown to dressing room 1. Small, simple, a mirror ringed with lights, a clothing rack, a small couch, a table with water and fruit. He set his bag down, removed his suit jacket carefully and began to stretch. Slowly, methodically, every joint and every muscle worked through a ritual he performed before any public appearance. Not for performance, for readiness. Bruce Lee did not believe in warming up for a show. He believed in being prepared for anything. At 6:30 in the evening, Carson's producer Fred came to Bruce's dressing room for the pre-show briefing. Fred knocked twice, heard a calm come in, and entered to find Bruce standing in the center of the room with his eyes closed. Fred waited. He knew enough not to interrupt. Bruce opened his eyes. "Fred, good to see you again." "Bruce, thanks for coming. Johnny's pleased you're here. Let me walk you through tonight's format. Of course, you'll be the first guest. You'll come out, sit with Johnny. He'll ask about your career, your philosophy, what you've been working on. Standard conversation, maybe 8 to 10 minutes. Then we bring out the second guest." Fred paused. "The second guest is a professional wrestler called André the Giant. He's very large. Johnny wants to create a moment between the two of you, a discussion about size versus skill, strength versus speed. Light, playful, nothing physical." Bruce looked at Fred with those eyes, dark and focused in a way that made people feel they were being studied at a level they couldn't quite describe. "You've said that twice," Bruce observed. "Nothing physical. Why do you feel the need to repeat it?" Fred shifted slightly. "André is unpredictable. He's been drinking since he arrived, not visibly impaired, but loosened. And he's heard that Johnny called you the most impressive physical specimen to ever appear on the show. I don't know who told him, but he knows, and he isn't pleased about it." Bruce was quiet for a moment, then softly, almost to himself. A proud giant who feels disrespected on live television in front of 28 million people. "Bruce, if you're uncomfortable, we can restructure the I'm not uncomfortable, Fred." His voice was quiet but final, like a lock clicking into place. "I'm never uncomfortable. I'm calculating." Fred left the dressing room carrying a feeling he couldn't name exactly. Not fear, but the sensation of having placed two volatile elements in close proximity and realizing the reaction was no longer within anyone's control. 8:45 in the evening, 45 minutes before showtime, it happened. The thing that changed everything. André left his dressing room to use the restroom down the corridor, past dressing room 1, past Bruce Lee's door. He walked heavily, each step sending a faint tremor through the floor. As he passed dressing room 1, the door was open. Bruce was inside, shadow boxing, moving at a speed that seemed almost beyond what a human body should be capable of. His fists were a blur. His feet barely touched the ground. Sharp, controlled exhales punctuated every movement. André stopped. He stood in the doorway, filling it completely, blocking the corridor light. He watched Bruce move for exactly 4 seconds. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not an appreciative one. A deep, rumbling, contemptuous laugh from his belly that filled the hallway. Bruce stopped mid-movement, turned, and saw the mountain in his doorway. Their eyes met for the first time. André leaned against the frame, the wood creaking under his weight. He looked down at Bruce, the way someone looks at something small and unexpected on their dinner plate. "So you are the little kung fu man," André said, his voice filling the room like smoke filling a jar. "The one Johnny thinks is so impressive, the most impressive physical specimen." He repeated the phrase slowly, letting the mockery settle into each word. "I have seen impressive. I have fought impressive. You are not impressive. You are small. You are fragile. And if we were not on television tonight, I would show you exactly what impressive means." Bruce stood perfectly still. His hands were at his sides. His breathing had not changed. He looked up at André the way a surgeon studies an X-ray, not with feeling, with information. "You're blocking my doorway," Bruce said quietly. André didn't move. He leaned further in, his head now inside the room, his shoulders pressing both sides of the frame. The wood groaned louder. "In my country, little men do not tell big men what to do. In my country, little men step aside. They lower their eyes. They understand their position. "This isn't your country," Bruce said. Same tone, same volume. The same unshakable calm that was beginning to unsettle André more than any threat could have, because André understood threats. He had lived inside a world of threats his entire life. What he did not understand was a man who showed no fear while standing 5 feet from someone who could cause serious harm with one hand. Gerald Mayers turned the corner at that exact moment. He saw André filling Bruce's doorway, saw the posture, read the energy between them, and his stomach dropped. He froze. His training said intervene. His instincts said step back. André straightened, pulling himself from the frame. He looked at Gerald, then back at Bruce. "Tonight," André said, pointing one massive finger, a finger wider than most men's wrists. "Tonight, when we are on that stage together, I am going to lift you over my head like you weigh nothing. And 28 million people will see exactly what you are. Small, helpless nothing. A toy I can break whenever I decide." André turned and walked toward the restroom. Gerald pressed himself flat against the wall the way you press against a building when a truck passes too close on a narrow street. When André was gone, Gerald hurried to Bruce's door. "Mr. Lee, I'm so sorry. Are you all right? I can call security. We can separate the segments entirely." "Gerald," Bruce's voice stopped him. "What is your name again?" Gerald Mayers." "Gerald, how long have you worked on this show?" 2 years, Mr. Lee." "In 2 years, have you ever seen an episode people still talked about the next day?" Gerald thought. "A few, maybe 3 or 4. What made those episodes memorable?" Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, thought harder. Something unexpected happened. Something that wasn't scripted. Bruce smiled. The first smile Gerald had seen from him all evening. Not warm, the smile of a man who had just received exactly what he needed. "Go tell Fred the show proceeds as planned. Both segments, no changes. André comes out after me. Everything exactly as scheduled." "But Mr. Lee," he threatened to. "I heard every word, Gerald." Bruce turned back to the mirror and adjusted his tie. His hands were perfectly still. "He said he's going to lift me in front of 28 million people. That's a promise I very much want him to attempt." This is the part of the story that almost never gets told, because what happened next wasn't just a television moment. It was a lesson about what happens when confidence built on intimidation meets something it simply cannot process. 11:31 at night. The show is live. 28 million Americans are watching. Ed McMahon has delivered his introduction. Johnny Carson has done his monologue, landed every joke, and now sits behind his desk, the Los Angeles skyline painted behind him. The NBC orchestra settles into quiet. Carson turns to camera 2 with that specific expression that tells America something memorable is coming. "My first guest tonight is a man who, last time he was here, generated more viewer mail than anyone we've had this entire year. He is a martial artist, an actor, a philosopher, and frankly, one of the most extraordinary individuals I have ever had at this desk. Please welcome Bruce Lee." The curtain parts, Bruce steps through. The studio audience of 450 people does something that almost never happens on The Tonight Show. They stand before he has spoken a single word. Bruce walks to the desk with that walk, the one Carol described as weightless, and shakes Carson's hand. His grip is firm but measured. He sits. Applause continues for 11 seconds. Carson lets it run. He knows quality television when he sees it. When the audience settles, Carson leans forward. "Bruce, the last time you were here, you did something to my hand during a handshake that I felt for 3 days. My doctor asked if I'd been in an accident. What did you do?" The audience laughs. Bruce smiles. "I simply redirected the energy of your grip back through your own wrist. A basic principle. Use your opponent's force against them, even in a handshake. So every time I shake your hand, I'm essentially working against myself." In a manner of speaking, yes. That explains my entire career in television. The audience roars. Carson is fully in his element. Two performers who understand timing at a cellular level, building something electric together. They talk for 8 minutes. Bruce discusses his philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, the concept of being like water. Carson asks genuinely informed questions that show he studied his guest rather than just glancing at the cards. Bruce demonstrates a technique on Carson's hand, gently, and Carson's expression shifts to real amazement. The audience gasps. It's effortless, beautifully constructed television. Then Carson's expression changes slightly. Subtle, almost unreadable, but Bruce catches it instantly because he catches everything. Carson is about to introduce the second guest, and something in his eyes resembles an apology. Bruce, stay right where you are, because my next guest is someone I believe you'll find very interesting. He stands nearly 7 feet tall. He weighs over 400 pounds. He is called the eighth wonder of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, André the Giant. The curtain parts again. The sound from the studio audience is not applause. It is a gasp, a collective, involuntary intake of breath from 450 people confronted with something their minds cannot immediately process. André steps through the curtain, and the entire stage seems to contract. The desk appears smaller. The chairs look like furniture from a child's playroom. Carson, who is 6 feet tall, looks small. André is wearing a custom black suit. The jacket alone required enough fabric for 3 normal garments. His white shirt is open at the collar because no tie manufacturer produces ties for a neck of that circumference. His hands hang at his sides like heavy tools. He walks toward the desk, and each step sends a vibration through the studio floor that the audience can feel in their seats. Bruce does not stand. He remains seated, turned slightly in his chair, watching André approach. His eyes are tracking, measuring stride length, weight distribution, balance, the subtle favoring of the left knee that tells Bruce the right leg carries more structural damage. In the 4 seconds it takes André to walk from the curtain to the desk, Bruce Lee has already identified 11 vulnerabilities. André reaches the desk. He does not sit. He stands, towering over everyone, and looks down at Bruce the way a ceiling looks down at a candle. So, André says into the upward-angled microphone, "This is the small man who is supposedly more impressive than me." 28 million people hold their breath. Carson felt the shift immediately. The warmth in the studio that had existed 30 seconds earlier was gone. In its place was silence, not quiet silence, the kind that settles when 450 people simultaneously realize they may be witnessing something they didn't expect. "André, welcome to the show," Carson said, his voice steady and professional, though his eyes were performing a separate calculation. "Please have a seat. We have a specially reinforced chair ready for you." André ignored the chair. He remained standing. "I prefer to stand," he said. "I enjoy standing when I meet smaller people. It reminds them of something." "And what is that?" Carson asked, reaching for a thread of humor, trying to do what he did better than anyone in television, defuse tension with timing. "Their place," André said. No smile. The words landed on the room like stones dropped into still water. Bruce hadn't moved, hadn't shifted in his chair, hadn't uncrossed his legs. He was watching André with an expression the camera struggled to fully capture, but that the studio audience could feel. It was patience, not passive patience. Not the patience of someone waiting for something to end. The patience of something hunting. Carson tried again. André, Bruce was just sharing his philosophy of martial arts, the concept that adaptability and precision can overcome raw strength. As someone who uses his remarkable size as his primary advantage, what's your response to that idea? André looked at Carson, then at Bruce, then he laughed. That same contemptuous laugh from the hallway, but now amplified through the studio sound system. Now 28 million people heard it. "Speed and technique," he repeated. "I will demonstrate speed and technique." He moved fast, shockingly fast for a man his size. He reached down, gripped the armrest of Bruce's chair with one hand and lifted, not the armrest, the entire chair, with Bruce Lee seated in it. He raised it 6 inches off the ground with a single arm, holding a 135-pound man and a 40-pound chair as casually as a person holds a cup. The audience screamed, not cheered, screamed. Carson shot to his feet. Ed McMahon half rose from his position, his face showing undisguised alarm. The camera operators, trained professionals who had filmed everything imaginable, didn't know where to point their cameras. And Bruce Lee, suspended in the air in a chair held by a giant, did something that nobody in that studio, none of the 28 million watching, nobody in the entire history of live television had ever witnessed. He didn't panic. He didn't grip the armrests. He didn't struggle or cry out. In the fraction of a second between the chair leaving the floor and reaching its peak, Bruce uncrossed his legs, shifted his center of gravity, and stood up on the seat of the suspended chair. He was now balanced on a chair being held in the air by a man who intended to humiliate him on live television. And from that position, standing on the chair, Bruce Lee was eye level with André the Giant for the first and only time. Their faces were 18 inches apart. André's hand still gripped the chair, his arm still extended. but his expression had changed. The contempt was gone. The mockery had disappeared. Something else had taken its place. Something André had not encountered since he was a child in Molian, being told by doctors that his body would never stop growing. Something cold, something foreign. Bruce looked directly into André's eyes, not up at them, into them, level, equal, and he said 5 words that 28 million people heard with complete clarity: "Put the chair down now." The studio was so silent you could hear the hum of the stage lights. André's arm began to tremble, not from the weight. 135 pounds meant nothing to a man who had lifted 400-pound wrestlers over his head. His arm was trembling because something was occurring that his body could not explain to his brain. Bruce Lee, standing on that suspended chair, had placed 2 fingers on the inside of André's wrist. Just 2 fingers. The index and middle finger of his right hand pressed into the soft tissue between the tendons on the underside of André's forearm. The pressure was precise, surgical, applied to a nerve cluster that most people don't know exists, and that Bruce Lee had spent 15 years learning to locate without looking. André's hand opened on its own, not by choice. His fingers released the armrest because his nervous system overrode his intention. The signal from his brain that said grip was cancelled by a signal from his wrist that said release. And in that fraction of a second, as André's hand opened and the chair began to fall, Bruce moved. He didn't jump. He stepped. 1 foot to the armrest, 1 foot to the desk. And then he was standing on Johnny Carson's desk, looking down at André the Giant. Looking down at the man the world called the 8th wonder of the world, on live television, in front of 28 million people. Bruce Lee stood on the desk, perfectly balanced, his navy suit unwrinkled, his tie straight, not one hair out of place, and he was looking down at André. The chair hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. The audience flinched. Carson had backed against the painted skyline, both hands pressed against the set wall. Ed McMahon had his hand on the telephone beside his chair. Doc Severinsen had risen from behind his music stand, his trumpet still in hand, his mouth open. And André stood there looking upward, for the first time in his adult life, looking up at another human being. His mind could not process this. He was André the Giant. People looked up at him. That was the fundamental rule of his existence. He was large, everyone else was smaller. And now a 135-pound man was standing on a desk looking down at him with an expression that held no fear, no anger, no triumph, just stillness, just absolute terrifying calm. "I asked you to put the chair down," Bruce said, his voice carrying through the studio without a microphone. Clear, controlled, every word precise. "You chose not to listen, so I resolved the situation myself. That is what I do. I don't wait for the world to accommodate me. I adapt. I find the solution that others don't see. That is not kung fu, André. That is not a performance. That is what happens when you underestimate someone based on their size." André said nothing. His mouth was slightly open. His right hand was slowly opening and closing, the nerve cluster still firing confused signals. He stared at his own hand as if it had acted independently of him. Then he looked back up at Bruce. The studio audience had not exhaled in what felt like a full minute. 28 million living rooms across America were frozen in place. Husbands had set down their drinks. Wives had stopped folding laundry. Teenagers who were supposed to be asleep were watching through cracked doors. Nobody changed the channel. Nobody moved. Carson, from his position against the back wall, did something that confirmed why he was the finest television host who ever lived. He began to laugh, not nervous laughter, not panicked laughter, genuine, full laughter that broke the tension like light through a window. "Bruce," Carson said, still laughing, straightening his tie, walking back toward his desk where a martial artist was still standing on it. "In 30 years of television, I have never had a guest stand on my desk. And I have to say, you're the first one I had no desire to stop." The audience erupted. Laughter, cheering, applause loud enough to shake the walls. Bruce looked down at Carson and smiled. Then he did something that would become the single most replayed moment in tonight's show history. He looked at André, gave a small respectful bow, and dropped from the desk back into his chair in one fluid motion. No jump, no stumble, no adjustment, just gravity and grace. He landed, crossed his legs, and adjusted his tie as though nothing had occurred. André stood motionless for 3 seconds, 3 seconds that stretched like something much longer, then something no one expected. Not Carson, not the audience, not the 28 million at home, not even Bruce. André sat down. He pulled the reinforced chair toward the desk, lowered his 420 pounds into it, and sat. The chair groaned but held. And then André the giant, the man who had never in his adult life shown deference to any other human being, turned to Bruce Lee and said 7 words that would be quoted in martial arts publications, wrestling retrospectives, and television histories for the next 50 years. "I have never met a man like you." His voice broke slightly on the last word, not from sentiment, from something deeper, from the internal shift that occurs when a belief carried across an entire lifetime is dismantled in 4 seconds by 2 fingers on a wrist. The audience erupted again, but differently. This was not shock. This was not entertainment in the traditional sense. This was 450 people witnessing something genuine, something that could not be produced or rehearsed by any network. A giant had acknowledged a man 1/3 his size as an equal, not because he was forced to, because he recognized something in Bruce Lee that could not be measured by any physical scale. And here's what that moment really means, not just for them, but for you. Every one of us has been in a room where someone tried to make us feel small, where someone used their size, their title, their volume, their resources to remind us of what they believed we lacked. And most of us in that moment feel the instinct to either shrink or overreact. Bruce Lee did neither. He stayed still. He stayed present. He solved the problem with precision rather than panic. That is not a martial arts lesson. That is a life lesson. Carson, sensing the moment the way only he could, did not reach for a joke, did not pivot to commercial. He leaned forward and asked the only question that mattered. "André, what just happened? Help us understand what we saw." André looked at his right hand again, opened it, closed it slowly. Then he looked at Carson, then at the audience, then at Bruce. "I have been the largest man in every room since I was 14 years old," André said. "Every room, every arena, every country. I have never been frightened of any person. I walked into this building tonight believing that size is everything, that this small man was not serious." He paused. The studio waited. "He made my hand open. I did not decide to open it. He decided and it opened. My body responded to him instead of responding to me. No person has ever done that. No one has ever taken that kind of control away from me. I weigh 420 pounds and he did it with 2 fingers." André turned to Bruce. "How?" Bruce leaned forward. "Your size is a gift, André, but you have used it as a weapon for so long that you forgot it also makes you vulnerable. Every nerve in your body is larger than a normal person's. Every pressure point is closer to the surface. Your size doesn't protect you from precision. It exposes you to it. The larger the machine, the smaller the tool needed to stop it." André held Bruce's gaze for a long moment. Then he extended his hand, not to grab, not to overwhelm, to shake. His massive hand hung between them, open, waiting. Bruce took it. His entire hand disappeared inside André's. They shook once, firm, respectful. 2 men from opposite ends of the physical world, meeting each other across a distance most people believed could never be crossed. Carson looked into camera 1. His eyes were wet. He denied it for years, but the recording does not lie. Johnny Carson, the most composed man in television, had tears in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carson said, and his voice carried 30 years of experience and something new, something unguarded. "I have hosted this program for 9 years. I have sat at this desk with presidents, astronauts, and legends. And I am telling you right now, what you just witnessed tonight will not be matched. Not on this show, not on any show. You just watched something real. And in this business, real is the rarest thing there is." The Tonight Show went to commercial. When it came back, André and Bruce were gone from the desk. But backstage, in the narrow corridor between dressing rooms 1 and 3, Gerald Mayers witnessed something he kept to himself for over 30 years. André was sitting on the concrete floor, his back against the wall, his legs stretched across the entire corridor. Bruce was sitting beside him. 2 men who 90 minutes earlier had been opponents were now talking quietly. André was asking questions about pressure points. Bruce was explaining the meridian system. André was listening with the focused attention of a first-day student. And Bruce was teaching with the patience of someone who understood that the most meaningful outcomes are not the ones the world sees, but the ones that happen in quiet hallways after the cameras stop, and 2 people who were supposed to be enemies discover they have more in common than anyone, including themselves, ever expected. André never spoke publicly about that evening, but 3 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at Bruce Lee's home in Bel Air. The handwriting was enormous, each letter nearly an inch tall, written by hands too large for standard penmanship. It said simply, "You are the only man who ever made me feel small. Thank you. It was the best feeling of my life. Your friend, André." And that's the part they never put in the history books, the part that matters most. It wasn't the chair, it wasn't the desk, it wasn't the two fingers, it was what happened after. It was the conversation on the floor, because real strength doesn't just win the moment. Real strength creates something after the moment ends. And if you've ever doubted whether quiet confidence can outlast loud intimidation, now you know.